They called it the Mother Road, but long before the neon lights, the roadside diners, and the chrome-plated dreams, Route 66 began as nothing more than a line on a dusty map, an impossible idea that would one day help build modern America. In the 1920s, the United States was bursting with change. Automobiles were no longer a luxury. Henry Ford's assembly lines had made them affordable for millions. The country was ready to move, but its roads were not. Farmers still dragged wagons through mud in the Midwest. Desert travelers struggled across unpaved trails in New Mexico and Arizona. There was no single road that tied the heart of America to its shining western promise. That's when a man named Cyrus Avery stepped forward, a businessman from Tulsa, Oklahoma. Avery envisioned a highway that would run from Chicago to Los Angeles, connecting the Great Lakes to the Pacific Ocean. It would cross 8 states, pass through hundreds of towns, and link the old America of small farms and factories with the new one of speed, steel, and sunshine. In the 1920s, his dream began to take shape. The government approved the name U.S. Route 66, a number chosen almost by chance, easy to remember, rhythmic, and destined to become legendary. But the road wasn't built overnight. It was carved mile by mile, often by hand, through rough terrain in rural towns. Construction crews battled floods, dust storms, and scorching heat. Bridges collapsed, machinery failed. Many laborers were World War I veterans, desperate for work during the Great Depression. Their sweat and struggle paved the way for what would soon be called the road that built America. By the early 1930s, the highway came alive. Farmers fleeing the Dust Bowl packed their families into rickety trucks and followed Route 66 west toward California, toward the mirage of green fields and steady work. John Steinbeck would later call it the Mother Road in The Grapes of Wrath, capturing the desperate hope of thousands who found salvation on its cracked pavement. For those travelers, Route 66 was more than asphalt. It was a lifeline. Each gas station, each roadside cafe became a beacon in the wilderness. In small towns like Amarillo, Santa Rosa, and Barstow, local families built diners and motor courts to feed and house the endless stream of weary travelers. A new roadside culture was born, one that celebrated curiosity, hospitality, and the open road. By the late 1940s, after World War II, Route 66 had transformed again. Veterans returned home with new cars and a hunger for freedom. America was booming, and Route 66 became its artery of adventure. Families piled into gleaming Chevrolets and set out on road trips from Chicago's skyscrapers to California's beaches. They ate burgers under neon lights, slept in motels shaped like teepees, and bought postcards that said, "Get your kicks on Route 66." But beneath the glamour lay darker stories. The highway that united a nation also revealed its divisions. Segregation still ruled the American South and Southwest. For black travelers, the road could be dangerous, even deadly. Many relied on the Negro Motorist Green Book, a guide listing safe places to eat, rest, and refuel. For them, Route 66 was a road of both hope and hazard, a symbol of freedom laced with fear. Meanwhile, the Native American communities along the highway saw their culture commercialized. Traders set up stands selling Indian curios, handmade jewelry, pottery, and souvenirs. Tourists marveled, while the people themselves often lived in poverty just beyond the roadside glow. The road brought prosperity, but not for everyone. Still, the legend of Route 66 kept growing. It became a stage where America played out its dreams. Truckers hauled goods from one coast to another. Soldiers convoyed west to train for war. Hitchhikers chased destiny beneath the desert stars. Hollywood turned it into myth, a road of rebellion and discovery. Then, in the 1950s, came the greatest challenge of all. President Dwight Eisenhower, inspired by Germany's Autobahns, launched the Interstate Highway System, a vast network of faster, safer roads designed for the atomic age. The new interstates bypassed small towns, cutting straight through America's heartland. One by one, the diners, motels, and mom-and-pop stations that had thrived along Route 66 began to die. Traffic vanished. Neon lights flickered out. Entire communities, once built around the rhythm of passing travelers, were left in silence. By 1985, Route 66 was officially decommissioned. Its signs were torn down. Maps erased its name. The Mother Road, once the artery of a nation, was pronounced dead. But legends don't die that easily. In the decades that followed, nostalgia and passion brought the road back to life. Travelers began seeking the old Route 66, the ghostly remnants of diners, motels, and drive-ins. Restoration projects sprang up across the Midwest and Southwest. Historians called it a living museum, a journey through America's 20th century. Today, from the Art Deco towers of Tulsa to the sun-baked highways of Arizona, Route 66 remains a symbol of what America once was and what it still wants to be. A country built on wheels and wanderlust, a dream that refuses to fade no matter how many interstates rise above it. And when you drive those forgotten stretches, you can still feel it. The echo of engines, the whisper of hope, the smell of gasoline and rain on dust, the heartbeat of a nation that once believed it could build its future 1 mile at a time. Because Route 66 was never just a road. It was, and still is, the road that built America.
The wind came first, slow, whispering, and dry. Then came the dust. By 1934, the once green heart of America had turned into a sea of dirt and despair. From Oklahoma to Kansas, from Texas to Colorado, the sky itself became a storm. Families who'd lived on the same land for generations watched it vanish beneath mountains of sand. The Dust Bowl had arrived, and with it, the greatest migration in American history. For years, farmers had plowed deep into the Great Plains, tearing up native grasses to plant wheat. When drought hit, the soil had nothing left to hold it together. The wind took over, stripping the earth bare, turning the horizon black. Cattle choked, crops failed, schools shut down as children coughed up dust. People sealed their windows with wet rags and prayed, but even faith couldn't keep the grit from their lungs. Then came the words that would echo through the decades. Go west. California, the land of oranges, sunshine, and work, became a symbol of salvation. Rumors spread that there were farms hiring hands by the thousands, fields rich and green where anyone willing to work could rebuild their life. It didn't matter if those stories were true. For many, it was the only dream left. And so they left. They sold what little they had, a cow, a sewing machine, a wedding ring, and bought battered trucks or old Fords. Furniture was tied with ropes. Mattresses were stacked high. Babies cried in the heat. Then they turned their wheels west, following a thin ribbon of road that promised a new beginning, Route 66. The journey was brutal. The sun blazed like fire, tires shredded on the hot asphalt, engines overheated and broke down in the desert. Families camped by the roadside, cooking beans over small fires, washing in muddy streams. They called themselves Okies, a term that began as an insult but became a badge of survival. At night, the road glowed with headlights, endless caravans of broken dreams. In Arizona, the heat could melt tar. In New Mexico, the mountains tested every engine. In California, the Border Patrol waited, wary of the tide of the desperate. Thousands made it through. Thousands more turned back or died along the way. Route 66 was their lifeline, Small towns along the road saw the refugees coming and changed overnight. Gas stations, repair shops, and diners appeared out of nowhere. For every family that broke down, someone was ready to patch a tire or sell a loaf of bread. Entire communities survived by helping or exploiting the migrants. In the camps outside Bakersfield and Fresno, the dream of California often met a harsh reality. Wages were low, conditions were cruel. Families worked 12-hour days picking fruit under the relentless sun, living in tents or shacks made of tin and canvas. Local papers called them filthy and lazy. They were treated like strangers in their own country. But in the midst of hardship, something extraordinary happened. The migrants, once isolated farmers, began to see themselves as part of something larger. Shared suffering became shared strength. They formed camps, organized schools, and sang songs about endurance and faith. Folk singers like Woody Guthrie gave their stories a voice. I ain't got no home in this world anymore. Then came John Steinbeck, who immortalized their struggle in The Grapes of Wrath, 1939. Through the Joad family's journey west, Steinbeck captured not just the physical pain of migration, but the spirit of resistance that burned beneath it. His novel shocked America, forcing the nation to confront the human cost of its own prosperity. Route 66 became more than a highway. It became the road of redemption. It symbolized the will to survive when everything else had been stripped away. For every family that lost their land, there was another who found hope in the horizon. For every dust storm that buried a town, there was a sunrise waiting on the other side of the desert. By the end of the 1930s, more than 250,000 people had followed the same trail west. California's fields and factories overflowed, and the face of America changed forever. These migrants, the farmers, the truckers, the dreamers, became the backbone of a new working class. They built roads, picked crops, and fought in the war that soon followed. They carried the lessons of the Dust Bowl with them, never to take land or life for granted again. Even today, when you drive the old Route 66, you can still see traces of their journey. Rusted cars half buried in sand, faded billboards advertising ice-cold water and vacancy, abandoned motels where laughter once echoed under desert skies. Every mile holds a story of endurance, loss, and an unbreakable hope that refused to die. The Great Migration West was not just a flight from disaster. It was a rebirth of courage, of community, of the American dream itself. In the face of dust and desperation, ordinary people found extraordinary strength. They proved that a nation's heart isn't found in its wealth or its cities, but in the miles of road where its people refuse to give up. And so, as the sun sets over the Mojave Desert, the wind still carries whispers of their journey. You can almost hear the rattle of an old truck, the cry of a baby, the voice of a man singing softly beside a campfire. California, here we come. Because in the darkest days of the 1930s, that's all they had, a road, a dream, and the burning will to keep moving west.
The rumble of engines, the glow of neon signs, the smell of gasoline and dust. By the late 1940s, America was on the move again. Not out of desperation this time, but out of desire. The Great Depression and World War II had ended, and a restless nation was ready to hit the open road. The symbol of that newfound freedom was an old highway reborn, Route 66. Before the war,
it had carried refugees and dreamers west in search of survival. Now it carried families, soldiers, and lovers in search of something else: adventure. The same cracked pavement that once echoed with the cries of Dust Bowl migrants now hummed with the laughter of children leaning out of station wagons, with the radio playing Get Your Kicks on Route 66. America was changing fast. Factories that had built tanks and planes now built cars, shiny, powerful machines with chrome grills and roaring engines. The automobile was no longer a luxury, it was a birthright. And Route 66, stretching 2,448 miles from Chicago to Los Angeles, became the great stage for the American dream on wheels. The post-war economy boomed. Soldiers returned home, married sweethearts, and started families. Suburbs expanded, highways filled, and a new kind of traveler emerged: the American vacationer. They loaded up their Fords and Chevys with picnic baskets and maps. Their kids piled in the back, and they headed west, chasing sunsets and stories. Route 66 welcomed them with open arms. All along the road, a new landscape bloomed: motels shaped like teepees, diners with gleaming jukeboxes, and gas stations promising service with a smile. Towns like Tucumcari, Gallup, and Winslow transformed into vibrant pit stops. Entrepreneurs saw opportunity in the endless stream of travelers and began to build the culture that would come to define mid-century America. Neon became the language of the highway. Signs blinked in pink and blue, calling out across the desert night: eat, vacancy, cold beer. For weary travelers, each glowing letter was a promise of rest, comfort, or simply the thrill of being somewhere new. It wasn't just about getting from point A to point B anymore. The journey itself became the destination. Families stopped at roadside attractions: giant dinosaurs in the desert, meteor craters, and world's largest everything. They filled scrapbooks with postcards, ate burgers under the stars, and told stories that would echo through generations. But beneath the fun and freedom, there was still grit. The road wasn't easy. Long stretches of Route 66 cut through blistering desert, treacherous mountain passes, and miles of empty plains. Cars broke down, tires blew out, gas ran dry. There were no cell phones, no GPS, only courage, patience, and a good toolkit. Yet that struggle became part of the magic. To conquer the road was to conquer America itself. Every family that made it to California felt like they had crossed a continent, and in a sense, they had. Along the way, Route 66 became a mirror of American life, its foops, its contradictions, its constant reinvention. Diners along the route became melting pots, where truckers sat beside tourists, where waitresses swapped stories with strangers from every corner of the country. It was the great equalizer, asphalt democracy. And then there were the truckers, the unsung heroes of the post-war boom. They hauled steel, grain, and dreams across the heartland, keeping the economy alive 1 mile at a time. Their CB radios crackled with slang and camaraderie, and Route 66 became their lifeline, a road of sweat, solitude, and brotherhood. Hollywood soon caught the fever. Movies like The Grapes of Wrath had shown the pain of the road. Now, new films and songs celebrated its freedom. Nat King Cole's silky voice turned Route 66 into an anthem. Television followed with the 1960s series Route 66, where 2 men in a Corvette chased meaning across America. Suddenly, everyone wanted to get their kicks. But even amid the glamour, shadows lingered. Not every traveler was welcomed equally. In many towns, black families on road trips still faced segregation and danger. They carried the Negro Motorist Green Book, a guide listing safe motels, cafes, and service stations. For them, the open road was both liberation and risk, a journey through beauty and bigotry alike. Still, the road endured. By the 1950s, Route 66 wasn't just a highway, it was a national identity. It embodied the spirit of optimism, rebellion, and reinvention that defined post-war America. Every diner stool, every motel room, every gas pump told a story of movement, of a country that refused to stand still. But progress has a way of erasing its own footprints. In the late 1950s, President Eisenhower's interstate highway system began cutting through the nation. Wider, faster, safer. New roads bypassed the small towns that had thrived on Route 66. Traffic disappeared and neon lights began to dim. The Mother Road, once the heartbeat of America, started to fade into memory. Yet even as its signs rusted and its motels emptied, the legend of Route 66 never truly died. Travelers returned, not for convenience, but for connection. To drive Route 66 was to rediscover America, its small towns, its forgotten diners, and its stubborn resilience. It was a journey backward and forward at once, through history and heartland.
It was called the Main Street of America. But behind the bright neon signs and glossy postcards, Route 66 hid a far darker truth, one written not in chrome and gasoline, but in blood, sweat, and sacrifice. When the highway first began to snake its way across the country in the late 1920s, it was hailed as a symbol of progress, a road that would connect Chicago to Los Angeles, the industrial heartland to the Pacific frontier. But progress, as history often reminds us, comes with a price. And along Route 66, that price was steep. The first victims were the builders themselves. Thousands of men, many of them World War I veterans and desperate laborers of the Great Depression, were hired to carve a highway through mountains, deserts, and farmlands. There were no safety rules, no unions, no protections. Explosions and rock slides were common. In the hot sun of Arizona, men collapsed from exhaustion. In Oklahoma, bridges buckled and workers drowned. Their names were never recorded on plaques or monuments. Their graves, often unmarked, still lie somewhere beneath the asphalt they helped create. As the road opened, another kind of danger emerged, one born not of nature, but of man. Route 66 cut through isolated stretches of countryside and dusty border towns where law was often as thin as the horizon. Travelers carried cash, and criminals knew it. During the 1930s and 40s, newspapers began to fill with stories of roadside robberies and murders. Hitchhikers vanished without a trace. Small-town sheriffs found bodies dumped in the desert, victims of what came to be called the bloody trail of the Mother Road. The same freedom that drew travelers west also drew predators. In the depths of the Depression, crime traveled as fast as the dust storms. Desperate men turned to banditry, robbing gas stations and truckers for a few dollars or a loaf of bread. Infamous figures like Bonnie and Clyde once sped down sections of Route 66, their stolen Ford V8s leaving tire tracks and bullet holes in their wake. For every smiling tourist on a postcard, there was another story of fear, of violence, of life on the edge of survival. And then came the cost no one wanted to speak about, the communities erased in the name of progress. When the federal government expanded Route 66 through rural America, it sliced through farmlands, tribal territories, and small neighborhoods. Entire Native American communities were displaced to make way for bridges and bypasses. In the 1930s, sections of the road through New Mexico and Arizona cut across lands sacred to the Navajo and Hopi. The road brought tourists who snapped pictures of Indian curios, but seldom saw the poverty behind the souvenir stands. For Black Americans, the highway promised freedom, but often delivered danger. Many stretches of Route 66 passed through sundown towns where people of color were forbidden after dark. The Green Book became their Bible, listing safe places to eat, sleep, and refuel, survival guides for those who dared to chase the same dream white travelers took for granted. The open road, that symbol of liberty, was not equally open to all. And even the construction of the highway's modern replacements, the new interstate system in the 1950s and 60s, came at a human cost. When President Eisenhower's vision of high-speed interstates began to replace old Route 66, many small towns were bulldozed or bypassed entirely. Local businesses that had thrived for decades, mom-and-pop motels, diners, service stations, vanished almost overnight. And in the cities, those new highways tore through working-class and minority neighborhoods. In places like St. Louis, Tulsa, and Albuquerque, entire Black and Latino communities were displaced to make way for the progress of concrete and steel. Their homes were flattened, their histories buried beneath overpasses. But for all its blood and loss, Route 66 continued to captivate the American imagination. Perhaps because it represented the truth about the country itself, that progress and pain often travel side by side. For every story of success, there's another of someone left behind. The road's darker legacy didn't end with its construction. By the 1950s, as Route 66 became the stage for family vacations and teenage rebellion, it also became the setting for countless tragedies. Car crashes fueled by speed and exhaustion turned sections of the highway into death zones. In some stretches of the Texas Panhandle, fatal wrecks were so common that locals began to call them the Widow's Mile. Truckers told ghost stories of phantom hitchhikers, pale figures seen on lonely desert nights vanishing before the headlights. Whether real or imagined, those stories carried the weight of all the lives lost along the way. But perhaps the most haunting truth is this: every mile of Route 66 was built on contradiction. It gave America mobility, but it also destroyed communities. It offered hope to the poor while enriching the powerful. It promised freedom, but too often delivered inequality. Today, when travelers drive the remnants of old Route 66, they see the cheerful remnants, the restored diners, the vintage motels, the murals celebrating the Mother Road. But beneath the nostalgia lies something more complex, a reminder that history's progress is never clean and never free. Those who built the road paid with their lives. Those who lived along it paid with their homes. And those who traveled it, some found glory, others met ghosts. In the end, Route 66 was not just a highway of dreams. It was also a highway of shadows, a long winding mirror reflecting the price America was willing to pay for its vision of progress.
The road promised freedom, but not for everyone. For white families and shiny Chevrolets, Route 66 was a ribbon of liberation, stretching from Chicago's steel skyline to California's Golden Coast. For Black travelers, however, that same road could turn deadly after sundown. The Mother Road was both a path to opportunity and a reminder that America's freedom came with conditions. In the 1930s through the 1960s, segregation wasn't confined to the Deep South. It stretched across the entire country, even along the so-called Main Street of America. Route 66 passed through 8 states, and nearly every one had towns known as sundown towns, places where signs at the city limits warned, "Don't let the sun set on you here." For black motorists, that wasn't just a threat, it was a law enforced by fear. Imagine the scene. A family loads up their car, a father at the wheel, a mother beside him, and 2 children in the back. They're heading west, chasing a dream like millions of others. But unlike others, they carry more than luggage. They carry maps marked with danger zones, extra gas cans to avoid unfriendly stops, and a small green book that could mean the difference between life and death. That book was the Negro Motorist Green Book. First published in 1936 by Victor Hugo Green, a black postal worker from Harlem, it listed hotels, restaurants, and gas stations across America where black travelers could eat, sleep, and refuel without harassment. Each year it grew thicker, its pages filled with safe havens, small black-owned motels, barbershops, and diners that welcomed the weary and the wary. For black families driving Route 66, the Green Book was a Bible of survival. A wrong turn could lead to humiliation, arrest, or worse. In Missouri, entire counties banned black motorists after dark. In Texas and Oklahoma, hotels refused them entry, and restaurants simply closed their doors. Even in California, the journey's promised land, racism lingered in subtle and brutal forms. Yet despite the dangers, thousands still made the trip. Many were part of the Great Migration, leaving behind the cotton fields of the South for the factories of Chicago, St. Louis, and Los Angeles. Route 66 was their highway of hope, a route to a better life. They traveled not for leisure, but for dignity. In towns like Springfield, Illinois, or Tulsa, Oklahoma, black travelers relied on a hidden network of safe stops, often private homes or boarding houses quietly listed in the Green Book. A hand-painted sign might mark a friendly business, or sometimes there was no sign at all, only a word passed through the community. You can stay there. They'll take care of you. These were not ordinary road trips. Every mile carried tension. Every roadside diner could turn into a trap. Some families packed their own meals, sandwiches, boiled eggs, and coffee to avoid restaurants that wouldn't serve them. Others traveled through the night, sleeping in their cars rather than risk a confrontation. And still, they drove on. Route 66 became both battleground and bridge, a road where stories of cruelty and courage intertwined. In 1948, when Irene Morgan and Sarah Keyes challenged segregation on interstate buses, their defiance paved the way for later civil rights victories. The open road became a silent stage for rebellion, where every safe journey was itself an act of resistance. The Green Book also captured the heart of black entrepreneurship. Many of the safe havens along Route 66 were owned by black families who built thriving businesses despite discrimination. In Springfield, Illinois, the Lincoln Motel welcomed travelers barred elsewhere. In Albuquerque, the Bay Street Hotel became a refuge for performers like Duke Ellington and Nat King Cole, who could play to white audiences but not sleep in their hotels. Even amid fear, community thrived. Churches along the route opened their doors to travelers in need. Black service stations became gathering spots, places to share news, advice, and strength. Route 66 may have been a dangerous road, but it was also a road of connection. A highway of hidden heroes who refused to surrender their right to move freely in their own country. By the late 1950s, the winds of change began to stir. The civil rights movement marched into the mainstream, and America's highways became both symbol and stage for justice. Freedom riders took to buses, activists organized car caravans, and the nation began to reckon with the contradiction of a free country where mobility itself was segregated. When the Civil Rights Act finally passed in 1964, it outlawed discrimination in public accommodations, including hotels, restaurants, and gas stations. For the first time, the open road truly opened for everyone. But by then, Route 66 was already fading. The new interstate highways bypassed the old towns, and many of the Green Book locations closed forever. Still, the legacy endured. Today, along the remnants of Route 66, historians and travelers retrace those hidden paths. They restore the old motels, collect Green Book copies, and share the stories of families who traveled not for fun, but for freedom.
The rumble of engines echoed across the desert, not from vacationers or wanderers, but from convoys of soldiers, tanks, and trucks roaring west. It was the 1940s, and Route 66, the main street of America, had become something else entirely, a lifeline of war. Before the neon signs, jukebox diners, and family road trips, this legendary highway served a far grimmer purpose. When World War II erupted, Route 66 became America's military artery, pulsing with troops, weapons, and dreams of victory. Stretching from Chicago to Los Angeles, its 2,400 miles linked the industrial heartland to the booming defense factories of the West. Every bend of the road told a story of grit, duty, and transformation. In 1941, as the nation prepared for war, General Dwight D. Eisenhower understood the power of mobility. The U.S. needed fast, reliable routes to move men and machines across the continent, and Route 66 was perfectly positioned. Soldiers from Illinois, Missouri, and Oklahoma drove across the plains toward California bases like Camp Cook, Fort Bliss, and the vast training grounds of the Mojave Desert. The towns along the highway changed overnight. Quiet gas stations filled with army trucks. Diners that once served pie to travelers now served coffee to uniformed men on their way to war. Motels became barracks. Garages turned into repair depots. Route 66 throbbed with the energy of an entire nation on the move. As military convoys thundered westward, the road became a classroom for logistics, teaching America how to move an army. Soldiers learned to navigate the scorching Arizona deserts and steep New Mexico passes. Mechanics learned to keep engines running in sandstorms. It was a test of endurance, not just for men, but for the road itself. Meanwhile, back home, the factories of Los Angeles, San Bernardino, and Tulsa worked around the clock, producing aircraft, jeeps, and ammunition. Route 66 carried the lifeblood of war, steel, oil, and human courage, all westward toward the front lines of production. By the time victory was declared in 1945, Route 66 had become more than a road. It was a symbol of unity and strength, the highway that helped win the war. But the story didn't end with peace. When soldiers came home, many didn't just return to their old lives, they returned to Route 66. They remembered the endless road that carried them through the hardest days of their youth, and now it called them again, this time toward opportunity. For thousands of returning veterans, the GI Bill opened the door to new beginnings. Factories reopened, suburbs expanded, and the American dream hit the highway. Route 66 became the pathway of post-war prosperity, a ribbon of asphalt connecting military discipline to civilian ambition. Some became truckers, hauling goods across the same road they once drove in convoys. The trucking industry exploded after the war, turning Route 66 into a corridor of commerce. From the oil fields of Oklahoma to the loading docks of Los Angeles, the road carried America's rebirth. Others became entrepreneurs, opening diners, gas stations, and motels along the route. They painted their signs bright and their dreams bigger, catering to a new generation of travelers. The road warriors of war transformed into road dreamers, building the culture of the American highway, a culture of motion, independence, and hope. But not all the memories were glorious. Veterans carried scars, both visible and invisible. Many returned to drive trucks across lonely stretches of desert, the hum of the engine their only companion. Some said they preferred the road because it never judged them. The rhythm of wheels on pavement was steadier than life back home. In this post-war America, Route 66 became a kind of healing ground, a place to keep moving forward, to leave behind the ghosts of battle. Along its motels and truck stops, friendships formed, stories were shared, and a new identity was born, the American road warrior. And the transformation didn't stop there. As the Cold War began, Route 66 once again found itself tied to defense. Military convoys still used it, and new industries, aerospace, oil, and technology sprang up along its path. The same road that once moved tanks now carried rocket parts to California's space industry. The arsenal of democracy was evolving into the engine of innovation. By the 1950s, the legend of Route 66 was sealed. Songs, films, and novels immortalized it, but beneath the romance was a truth forged in war and work. Every neon-lit diner and open stretch of highway was built on the determination of those who had first conquered it with grit and gasoline.
The night hummed with engines, neon, and the promise of youth. Under the glow of diner lights and motel signs, America was falling in love, not with a person, but with a road. By the 1950s, Route 66 had become more than a highway. It was the stage for a new national identity, glittering with jukeboxes, chrome, and rock and roll dreams. The war was over. Soldiers had come home, the economy was booming, and the country was hungry for motion. America wanted to move, fast, and no road captured that restless spirit better than the 2,400 miles of blacktop stretching from Chicago to Santa Monica. Route 66 wasn't just a route, it was the ultimate symbol of freedom, youth, and reinvention. On Friday nights, teenagers piled into Chevys, Fords, and Thunderbirds, their engines rumbling like thunder beneath the neon signs of roadside America. The radio crackled with Elvis Presley's Hound Dog or Chuck Berry's Maybelline. In small towns from Oklahoma to Arizona, diners became dance floors and gas stations turned into social hubs. The post-war car culture was born, and Route 66 was its highway to glory. As suburbs spread and families prospered, Americans took to the open road like never before. The new interstate tourism movement saw millions of travelers heading west each summer, searching for sunshine, beaches, and the promise of California. The drive itself became the destination, and the businesses along Route 66 knew it. Motel owners painted their roofs turquoise and pink to catch drivers' eyes. Roadside diners added neon signs that blinked like stars. Billboards promised clean rooms, cold Coke, and color TV. Every stop was a spectacle, every mile a story. It was the golden age of Americana, where optimism glowed brighter than any tail fin. But beneath the glitter and chrome, there was something deeper, a cultural transformation unfolding on the open road. Route 66 was becoming a myth, a symbol that merged pop culture, mobility, and rebellion into one irresistible dream. Hollywood and music sealed its legend. In 1946, songwriter Bobby Troup penned the immortal tune Get Your Kicks on Route 66 after driving west with his wife, jazz singer Julie London. The song captured the rhythm of the road, its towns, its romance, its pulse, and artists from Nat King Cole to the Rolling Stones would later turn it into an anthem. Then came television. In 1960,
The hit TV show Route 66 brought the myth to living rooms across America. Each week, two young men in a Chevrolet Corvette cruised the highway, chasing adventure and self-discovery. Though the show filmed in various locations across the country, the name Route 66 became shorthand for freedom, for life lived beyond the ordinary. Back on the real road, the 1950s roared with transformation. Diners like the Blue Swallow Motel in Tucumcari, New Mexico, or the Wigwam Village in Arizona became icons of roadside Americana. Their neon lights reflected on chrome bumpers as families stopped for milkshakes and postcards. These weren't just pit stops, they were experiences, the heartbeats of mid-century optimism. Meanwhile, a new generation of musicians and poets saw the open road as a metaphor for rebellion. The beatniks of the late 1950s, Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, and their restless peers turned Route 66 into literary legend. Kerouac's On the Road captured the wild rhythm of post-war wanderlust, turning asphalt into poetry and travel into philosophy. To drive west on Route 66 was to chase freedom itself, to follow the call of the horizon. Yet the myth of Route 66 wasn't just about youth and speed, it was also about change. The highway became the great equalizer, bringing together truckers, tourists, artists, and dreamers, all chasing their version of the American dream. Small towns along the route thrived as travelers poured in. Diners became landmarks, and quirky roadside attractions, giant cowboy statues, reptile farms, and meteor craters turned into symbols of America's playful imagination. Every light, every jukebox, every chrome bumper reflected a country in motion, confident, curious, unstoppable. But even as the neon burned brightest, the shadows of change loomed. By the late 1950s, President Eisenhower's Interstate Highway Act was underway. The new superhighways promised faster travel, but at a cost. Route 66's winding roads and mom-and-pop motels couldn't compete with the straight, sterile speedways of the modern age. Still, before its decline, Route 66 had already carved its legend into America's soul. It became the birthplace of car songs, the backdrop of first loves, and the soundtrack of rebellion. From the jukebox rock of Buddy Holly to the roar of a V8 engine, everything about the era echoed with the rhythm of the road. Even today, when travelers cruise through faded towns like Seligman, Winslow, or Kingsman, they can still feel it, the ghostly glow of neon reflecting off cracked pavement, the echo of laughter spilling from an old diner, the spirit of a generation that believed the future was waiting just beyond the next curve. Route 66 wasn't just a road in the 1950s. It was America's stage, where chrome dreams met rock and roll hearts. It was where teenagers learned to rebel, where families learned to explore, and where a nation learned that freedom could fit inside a tank of gas. And though the lights may have dimmed, the legend still glows in every classic car show, every roadside diner, every vintage sign flickering to life at sunset. Because the neon may fade, but the dream, that wild, roaring rock and roll dream of Route 66 will never die. The sound came first. Not the hum of engines, but the silence that followed. Where once the laughter of travelers filled neon-lit diners and the roar of trucks shook motel walls, now only the wind moved through empty streets. By the 1960s, the great Route 66, once called the Main Street of America, was dying, slowly, quietly, under the weight of progress. This was the road that had carried the nation through its greatest trials. Dust Bowl refugees, wartime convoys, post-war dreamers and restless youth chasing rock and roll freedom. For 3 decades, Route 66 had been America's beating heart, a symbol of motion, connection, and hope. But the dream that built it would soon destroy it. It began with one man, President Dwight D. Eisenhower. In 1919, long before he became Commander-in-Chief, a young Lieutenant Eisenhower joined a U.S. Army convoy driving from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco, an experiment to test the nation's road system. The journey took 62 grueling days. Trucks broke down, bridges collapsed, and soldiers crawled across muddy ruts barely worthy of the word road. Years later, during World War II, Eisenhower saw how Germany's Autobahn, sleek, efficient, and military-ready, allowed troops to move swiftly across the country. When he became president in 1953, he remembered both experiences. America needed its own modern highway network, not just for travel, but for defense, commerce, and national unity. And so, in 1956, he signed the Federal Aid Highway Act, launching the largest infrastructure project in U.S. history, the Interstate Highway System. This was the beginning of the end for Route 66. At first, few realized what was happening. The interstates were hailed as miracles of modern engineering, wide, smooth, and fast. No stoplights, no sharp curves, no small-town speed limits. You could drive from Chicago to Los Angeles without ever slowing down. For travelers, it was progress. For the towns along Route 66, it was a death sentence. In the early years, construction crews carved through the American landscape, bypassing towns that had thrived for decades on highway traffic. Diner owners watched helplessly as traffic disappeared overnight. Motels that once flickered with neon vacancy signs now stood dark. Gas stations rusted, their pumps dry and forgotten. In Seligman, Arizona, businesses lost 95% of their customers in a single week after Interstate 40 opened. In Amboy, California, once a bustling stop in the Mojave Desert, the population dropped to near zero. Across the 8 states Route 66 crossed, thousands of families abandoned their roadside livelihoods, leaving behind ghost towns and fading memories. The new interstates didn't just change travel, they changed America's relationship to the road itself. Route 66 had always been about the journey, the roadside attractions, the conversations with strangers, the small-town charm. But the interstates turned travel into efficiency. The road became something to conquer, not to experience. Yet not everyone was ready to let it go. By the 1960s, nostalgia began to bloom. Musicians, writers, and travelers, many from the counterculture movement, started rediscovering the old road. They drove the cracked pavement, visited decaying motels, and sang songs about a disappearing America. Get Your Kicks on Route 66 became a bittersweet anthem, a reminder of what was lost. Still, the march of modernization continued. By 1970, nearly all the route had been replaced by interstates. I-55 in Illinois, I-45 through Missouri, I-40 across the Southwest, and I-10 and I-15 cutting into California. On June 27, 1985, the U.S. government officially decommissioned Route 66, erasing it from federal maps. It was no longer a highway, just a collection of disconnected local roads. The mother road was gone. But legends don't die that easily. Even as towns decayed, travelers returned, photographers, historians, and dreamers, drawn by the ghosts of neon and the echoes of tires on pavement. They found beauty in the ruins, rusting signs that once promised "Eat here," faded murals of smiling cowboys, and empty motels frozen in time. Communities began to fight back. In the 1990s, preservation groups emerged to save what remained. Route 66 associations sprang up across the 8 states, restoring diners, gas stations, and vintage motels. The road was reborn, not as a highway of commerce, but as a highway of memory. Today, Route 66 is a living museum, a time capsule of 20th century America. It no longer carries the nation's traffic, but it carries its stories of farmers chasing hope, soldiers heading to war, families chasing freedom, and dreamers chasing sunsets. In the glow of a restored neon sign or the laughter echoing from a 1950s diner, you can still feel it, the heartbeat of a nation that once measured progress not by speed, but by experience. And if you listen closely, somewhere between the hum of the freeway and the whisper of the desert wind, you might still hear it, that old refrain drifting through time. If you ever plan to motor west, travel my way, take the highway that's the best, because even in its death, Route 66 never truly ended. It just changed lanes, from asphalt to legend.
The desert wind hums through the skeleton of an old diner. A rusted jukebox leans against a wall plastered with peeling posters. Across the cracked asphalt, a faded neon sign flickers to life for a brief moment before surrendering to darkness. The road is quiet now, but if you listen closely, you can almost hear it. The laughter of travelers, the rumble of engines, and the whispers of a forgotten America. Once upon a time, Route 66 was not just a road, it was a lifeline. From Chicago to Los Angeles, stretching nearly 2,448 miles, it stitched together the very soul of the United States. It carried Dust Bowl migrants escaping despair in the 1930s, soldiers heading to war in the 1940s, and families chasing the post-war dream of freedom and prosperity in the 1950s. Every diner, motel, and gas station along the route told a story of hope, ambition, and the open road. But today, those places stand silent, their walls crumbling, their stories half buried beneath the sand. These are the ghosts of asphalt, remnants of an America that progress left behind. When President Eisenhower's interstate highway system began slicing across the country in the 1950s, it promised speed, safety, and efficiency. It delivered all of that, but at a price. The interstates bypassed the small towns that had thrived on Route 66 traffic. Within a few years, the lifeblood of those communities was gone. In Shamrock, Texas, the once bustling U Drop Inn, an Art Deco masterpiece built in 1936, stood empty for decades, its neon lights extinguished. In Amboy, California, the famous Roy's Motel and Cafe faded into the desert heat. In Glen Rio, straddling the Texas-New Mexico border, the last welcome sign stands crooked, its paint flaking like memory itself. These were not just businesses, they were symbols of a uniquely American way of life. Route 66 wasn't about efficiency, it was about experience. It was about the long drive, the friendly faces, the homemade pie at a roadside cafe. It was about getting lost and loving it. By the time Route 66 was officially discommissioned in 1985, it was already more legend than road. The federal government erased it from maps, declaring it obsolete. But the spirit of the Mother Road refused to die. Travelers still came, not for convenience, but for nostalgia.
They came searching for something America had lost, a connection to its own heartbeat. For some, that heartbeat still lingers in the forgotten corners of the Southwest. Drive through Oatman, Arizona, and you might find burros wandering through the streets, descendants of the pack animals once used by miners. Stop in Seligman, and you'll meet locals who refuse to give up. People like Angel Delgadillo, the barber who became the guardian angel of Route 66. When his town was bypassed by Interstate 40 in 1978, Angel didn't move away. Instead, he started a movement. He gathered business owners, historians, and dreamers to form the historic Route 66 Association of Arizona, sparking a preservation effort that would spread to all 8 states along the route. Thanks to them, Route 66 was reborn, not as a highway of commerce, but as a highway of history. Yet even with restoration, the ghosts remain. In Cadillac Ranch near Amarillo, 10 Cadillacs stand nose down in the dirt, a surreal monument to America's love affair with the automobile. In Hackberry, Arizona, an old general store still sells Route 66 souvenirs beneath a roof patched with tin and memory. Travelers stop, take photos, and drive away, but few realize they're walking through a living museum, an unintentional time capsule of mid-century America. Each abandoned diner and decaying motel is a chapter in a much larger story, the story of a nation that traded wonder for speed. The neon signs may be broken, but they still glow faintly at dusk, as if refusing to be forgotten. For those who dare to leave the interstate and take the old road, there's a haunting beauty in what remains. The asphalt may be cracked, but it carries echoes, the sound of engines from another era, the radio crackling with Elvis or Buddy Holly, and the warm laughter of families watching the sunset over an endless horizon. In a world where GPS guides every turn and highways blur past like conveyor belts, Route 66 still offers something real: imperfection. It's slower, rougher, and sometimes desolate, but it reminds travelers that America's story wasn't built on shortcuts, it was built on journeys. Drive long enough, and you'll find yourself in places like Eric, Oklahoma, where the Sandhills Curiosity Shop still welcomes visitors with offbeat humor and old-time music. You'll see the blue whale of Katosa, a roadside relic smiling beneath layers of chipped paint. You'll pass through ghost towns where time stopped in 1959, yet the air still hums with invisible life. Each stop feels like opening a time capsule, a moment frozen before progress paved over the past. And maybe that's the true magic of the Mother Road. It's not just about where you go, but what you remember along the way.
The first time you see it, you don't even realize it's alive. A cracked sign flickers against the twilight. A diner hums faintly with music from another era, and a Harley's engine rumbles through the desert wind. Route 66, the Mother Road, is breathing again, decades after the interstates nearly buried it under concrete and forgetfulness. Once the lifeblood of America, Route 66 had been bypassed and decommissioned by the mid-1980s. The neon signs went dark, motels closed, and diners became silent monuments to a bygone era. Small towns faded, and the Mother Road became, in many places, a ghost of memory. But the spirit of the road never disappeared. It only waited for those willing to reclaim it. In the 1990s, a growing movement began to take shape. Historians, preservationists, and everyday travelers started tracing the cracked asphalt, seeking not just to remember, but to restore. Angel Delgadillo, the barber of Seligman, Arizona, had refused to let his town vanish quietly. With his ingenuity and passion, he founded the historic Route 66 Association of Arizona, inspiring communities across 8 states to fight for their heritage. Through newsletters, grassroots campaigns, and sheer determination, they began a quiet revival of the road that had once connected a nation. But history alone could not restore the Mother Road. It took the bikers, dreamers, and wanderers to bring it back to life.
Across the United States, motorcycle clubs began to organize rides along Route 66, treating it as a pilgrimage rather than a commute. The wind in their hair, the hum of engines, and the endless horizon became a living tribute to the freedom Route 66 once symbolized. Families too returned, drawn by nostalgia and curiosity. Tourists flocked to the Blue Swallow Motel in Tucumcari, New Mexico, and the Wigwam Village in Holbrook, Arizona, eager to experience the kitschy charm of mid-century America. Restaurateurs dusted off old menus, repainted neon signs, and served coffee and pies as if the 1950s never ended. Roadside attractions, once abandoned and forgotten, were restored, from the Cadillac Ranch in Texas to the Santa Monica Pier, marking the road's terminus in California. Route 66 had always been a highway of stories for Dust Bowl refugees, World War II soldiers, post-war dreamers, and rebellious youth chasing rock and roll. Now, in its rebirth, it became a living anthology. Each restored diner, each repainted sign, and each rider who cruises the asphalt adds a new chapter to a narrative that refuses to fade. In Chicago, the official starting point of the Mother Road, historians organize walking tours telling stories of the first gas stations, motels, and diners that punctuated the city streets. In Los Angeles, tourists arrive at the Santa Monica Pier, marveling at how the Mother Road carried so many Americans across deserts, mountains, and prairies, connecting not just cities, but dreams. The revival is more than nostalgia. It is resilience, a reminder that progress need not erase history. Many of the towns along the Mother Road are small and struggling, yet the revival of tourism has brought economic life back. Small businesses have reopened, local artisans sell crafts inspired by Route 66, and diners once abandoned now hum with the sounds of families rediscovering the road. For younger generations, the road carries rebellion, the same spirit that inspired the 1950s travelers and 1960s counterculture. Motorcycle rallies, classic car shows, and vintage festivals celebrate a time when freedom meant the open road. These modern pilgrims understand that Route 66 is more than asphalt. It is a symbol of American independence, creativity, and the courage to chase dreams without compromise. Walking through the towns along the route, one notices the delicate balance between memory and motion. Faded murals depict cowboys, neon signs, and airplanes. Restored gas pumps gleam under the sun. Each mile is a conversation between past and present, a dialogue that reminds travelers that America's story is as much about rediscovery as it is about progress. Route 66's rebirth also honors the diverse voices that once traveled it. African American families guided by the Green Book, Dust Bowl migrants, veterans, truckers, and wanderers. Preservation efforts often highlight these stories, ensuring the Mother Road is remembered not just for its aesthetic charm, but for its role in shaping the nation. Today, Route 66 is both a road and a monument. Bikers roar along desert stretches, families photograph vintage motels, and historians document the artifacts left behind. Yet, the road remains open, unpredictable, imperfect, and infinitely inviting. Travelers can still take their time, stop where curiosity strikes, and reconnect with a version of America that values experience over speed. The Mother Road is no longer the primary artery of commerce, but in reclaiming it, Americans have found something equally vital, a highway of freedom. Route 66 reminds the nation that resilience is possible, that rebellion can be beautiful, and that the open road still promises the possibility of new stories. From Chicago's urban streets to Santa Monica's ocean breeze, from neon-lit diners to desert plains, the road lives again. It carries history and hope, asphalt and dreams. Every mile tells us that Route 66 was never just a highway. It was, and still is, a living testament to the American spirit. And as engines roar, laughter spills from diners, and neon lights glow against the twilight, one truth becomes clear. Freedom has been reborn on the Mother Road.